Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome again to another NERDIC Tuesday. I'm Jackie Garofano, Chief Technology Officer of CCAT, and here we are a part of the New England Regional Defense Industry Collaboration Community talking about Industry 4.0 readiness and the ecosystem. Our focus today is going to be continuing on with our advanced and additive manufacturing theme. So we have a technology demonstration of 3D printed parts manufactured with Desktop Metal Studio for the defense supply chain. So we have a really robust schedule and a lot of participation from our technology and community partners. So as we do, we start off with some comments from some of our NERDIC partners. And so I'll invite Patricia and Chris to join me. And then, as I said, we have our technology demonstration. And the focus of that will be, again, focus on Industry 4.0. And Christy, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. This is our ecosystem that we're talking about. And really, we've been on this NERDIC journey for several months now, and we're closing in on the home stretch. Again, our focus is on additive manufacturing, but we have had programs and technology demonstrations on augmented and artificial reality, big data and analytics, as well as automation and model-based definition. So you'll see those as I4.0 technologies in the schematic. Again, our ecosystem is comprised of many technology partners across the 6 New England states, as well as the manufacturing extension partnerships that we have. And joining me today is Patricia and Chris from Vermont. So I'd like to welcome both of them and say some remarks and a welcome for today's program. Patricia.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm Patricia Giovara, the Interim Center Director at VMEC, which is the Vermont Manufacturing Extension Center. We're the MEP of Vermont, and as you can see on the slide, there's an MEP center in each of the New England states, some with a more recognizable MEP in their name and others differently, such as Constep and Polaris. We've worked together as a New England region of MEP centers for many years on lots of topics. We've been working together within the NERDIC program as well for a couple of years on cybersecurity and also now on the topic of other Industry 4.0 technologies. And, you know, we like to also just, you know, find that intersection of helping manufacturers with their challenges with workforce, continuous improvement, productivity, as well as technology solutions. So we're really a connector and a resource for manufacturers.
Great, thanks, Patricia.
Chris?
Great, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Coulter. I'm VMEC's Advanced Manufacturing Technology Advisor. And my role within VMEC is to help Vermont manufacturers to grow and increase their competitiveness through these advanced manufacturing technologies, or Industry 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution. I've been leveraging my mechanical engineering background throughout my career to do product design and development, manufacturing, engineering, and just general creative problem solving. Really looking forward to solving problems for Vermont manufacturers that this advanced manufacturing technology really offers. One of the things I'm really excited about is that this technology really offers new design possibilities for people. These new technologies are really a paradigm shift, making new things possible. When I was a younger engineer, you really were more worried about designing for manufacturability, whether it was a molded part or a machine part. You had a lot of constraints and trade-offs in your design. And now with the switch from subtractive manufacturing to additive, you really have the possibility to design specifically for an application or an end user. And these allow you to put in features that were previously impossible. A great example of that is the part that was demonstrated last week in NERDIC's demo from a Vermont manufacturer, Concepts NREC, where they designed in these curved cooling channels inside of an impeller blade. Absolutely just could not be done with traditional technologies. The other thing I'm really excited about is just these regional centers. I mean, this technology has evolved exponentially, and it's really important to have these centers of expertise throughout the region that manufacturers can go to and rely upon to learn and stay current with all this technology. The thing that we're really trying to do is to collaborate between the industry needs and the workforce development. So, kind of pairing up the higher education to help explore these new technologies and to train the workforce to run them. And so that's why one of the centers that I'm talking about, these regional centers, but one of the ones that's new to the scene is what we call the Vermont Manufacturing Collaborative. And this is a new advanced manufacturing center that's going into the Vermont Technical College Randolph campus. And here we're going to have a lot of these polymer and metal additive manufacturing, as well as 5-axis CNC and a lot of metrology equipment, a lot of the types of stuff that you're going to see in today's demo. So it's very, very exciting. Our goal really is to make this technology accessible, affordable, and to help companies, with this learning platform. They can come in and experiment and de-risk their designs by accessing these technology centers. And we're not going to be able to do that unless we can work together regionally to pull all this together. So that's how we'll accomplish that. I just want to say thanks to CCAT for hosting these demonstrations and all the NERDIC partners. I'm looking forward to working with everyone, and I'm looking forward to the presentation.
Great, thanks so much, Chris. And you plugged a couple of things, right? So coming off of last week's demonstration, we have a whole library of all of the previous webinars. Again, the more recent being those technology demonstrations that our NERDIC partners have performed and reported out. So please, especially if those of you tuning in from Vermont, check those out, because there's so much richness in the ecosystem of where you can go to find some of this, maybe new to you technology. And on that note, we do have handouts that are, so thank you very much to Patricia and Chris for joining us. They'll be coming back on later during the Q&A session. So a couple of logistics before I then turn it over to our focused technology presentation. We do have the handouts that are located in GoToWebinar. So there's a PDF that's there and available to you. It will also be shared with you after the webinar today. There is a chat section and a Q&A section. So please drop your questions and/or comments for today's speakers. We very much appreciate it. Again, we have a robust schedule, a lot to cover in this advanced additive manufacturing scope of today. So hopefully we jam everything in, but if not, if there's any questions that follow on, our technology partners, the MEPs, everyone that's on today's webinar, please do reach out to them individually. I myself am a big fan of LinkedIn and social media, staying connected in the off days where we're not together on NERDIC Tuesdays. So I encourage you to leverage those resources and make connections as well. So with that, I will turn today's program over to Steve of Berkshire Innovation Center and BSS Additive. So I'll have our technology demonstration kick off. Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Patricia and Chris. This has been a really awesome opportunity for us to present. I'm going to talk a little bit today about our effort to begin benchmarking the desktop metal system, which we acquired just under 6 months ago with help from Mass Development through their Capital Skills Program. We're looking at ways that we can use this system in regional defense supply for a number of initiatives, which I'll detail further shortly. Next slide. So a little bit about background for me. In addition to being the operations manager for the facility here in Pittsfield, I also have a startup. We're developing methods for recycling salvageable scrap alloys for use in additive manufacturing. This work was started back in 2017 with the Mass Development Technology Innovation Grant in partnership with Connecticut Center for Advanced Technologies. Since that time, we've been able to expand that effort to include some work with NSF I-Corps program through MIT and UMass. We've been collaborating with the Valley Venture Mentors Program, Mass Challenge, Mass Tech Internship Partnership Program, and recently entered into a cooperative R&D agreement with the U.S. Navy to explore the art of possible in expeditionary additive manufacturing material supply. Towards that, I've got a number of colleagues. The first, which I'll introduce, is Jean Mazolik from the Mazolik Group. Jean, go ahead.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Steve. My name is Jean Mazolik, and as he said, I do have my own consulting company, Mazolik Group. A little bit about my background. I have a bachelor's and a master's in material science from MIT. I have spent the last 45 years in thermal spray industry with a real interest and expertise in the material side, predominantly metal and ceramic powders. So relative to that, I've got a lot of broad industry-based experience utilizing these technologies. I wanted to show this one photo here from ASB Industries because cold spray is now considered an additive manufacturing process. And this is a cold spray repair of magnesium. Up to this point, there was no viable method for repairing magnesium-based alloys. So it's very much of interest in the DoD as somewhat of a, a subset of the additive manufacturing space. Next slide, please. Now, what I'm part of Steve's team, and I'm supporting that again through my background and interest in powder metallurgy. Also very much interested in the recycling and reuse of materials, which is becoming extremely important and of interest to the DoD because there's a real need to support the war fighter in the field. And they don't necessarily have, materials off the shelf. So there's all kinds of technologies out there to look at converting scrap metals and components into usable materials to feed the various processes. My particular background in recycling goes back to my thermal spray days, and in one was in managing hexavalent chrome, which is a very well-known carcinogen from chrome oxide powder used in the printing industry. And also the reuse of tungsten and cobalt units from hard metal scrap, and that predominantly drills, bits, and seals. With that in mind, take a look at the photos on the right of this slide. I almost wish I had the labels taken off, because if I had taken those labels off and you looked at these, you would say those are 3 different materials. In reality, they are. They're totally different materials, same chemistry, but because of their manufacturing process and their morphologies, they are going to behave very differently in selected processes. So this is very important when it comes to the topic at hand, which is benchmarking. You really do need to understand the materials because it can affect your efficiencies. It can affect the end properties of your product. So I would just say, remember that, yes, it's tungsten carbide cobalt, but they are each different. So with that point, I think I'm turning it over to Mark.
Thank you, Jean. Go ahead, Mark.
Hey, everyone. Thanks, Steve, and thanks to our host. I'm a 25-year veteran in the technology industry, starting out as a design engineer in pro audio and then onto consumer products and enterprise products. And it was about 17 years ago now, I think, that I bought my first 3D printer as a design engineer. We found it invaluable in getting engineering verification and industrial design verification of the products. We were in the early stages of development and very quickly moved on to upgrading those from a product marketing standpoint because we found sales samples and getting into business and market development by getting works like samples out into the hands of potential customers while we were still early in the design phase was incredibly valuable. And as I eventually became responsible for watching P&L statements, I became very interested in what additive manufacturing might do for us in terms of inventory control in the future, and how manufacturing final products with additive manufacturing could revolutionize the market. And that's kind of where I've been pushing in my interest in this field for the past several years. And that was kind of the context of how Steve and I met 2 or so years ago now in the context of BSS additives. And echoing what Chris said earlier, the possibilities that in design revolution that the additive processes bring about, as well as the supply chain implications, just become more and more fascinating. So I'm pleased to be here today, and I guarantee I will be learning quite a bit as well.
Thank you, Mark. So a little bit more about the Berkshire Innovation Center. Berkshire Innovation Center is a Mass Life Sciences funded facility here in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. We're a member-driven facility, host to over 25 corporate organizations exploring industry applications in everything from defense manufacturing to non-woven textiles, paper products, laminates for furniture, underwater vehicles. We've got a company here that is in the process of 3D printing autonomous submersibles for use in the wind, offshore wind industry. We've got materials companies like EMA, Electromagnetic Applications, who is exploring applications in design and software for analyzing electrical influences in spacecraft. We've got a large group of companies. We've also got over 12 academic organizations, everything from University of Massachusetts, Rensselaer Polytechnic. We're talking with MIT about some collaborations. So we stretch across the state and also throughout the New England region. Next. We're host to a large selection of additive manufacturing equipment as well as metrology equipment. The original concept model was for the BIC to serve as a regional training center. Western Massachusetts needs to have access to these types of technologies to be able to be competitive, especially as overseas suppliers more and more implement them. We also have some interest in the defense supply chain, in that General Dynamics, an employer of over 1,800 people here in the Pittsfield area, is currently contracted with delivering some very, very significant defense systems, things like the Columbia-class submarine, as well as applications up north in our Vermont partner, where tactical and ordnance could come to play in uses for additive manufacturing, especially field deployable technologies. Next. And we were recently, because of the work we started in this space, the virtual reality, mixed reality, simulation, and 3D scanning space, awarded a significant grant from General Dynamics Mission Systems in an award of 15 HoloLens One headsets that we are now helping our members access. And we hope to be able to, again, offer to NERDIC partners for development purposes in things like training on advanced manufacturing, but also legacy systems, ways that we can start to hand that information on how to utilize these manufacturing tools to benefit the defense supply chain and ultimately the warfighter. Next. On this particular project, the benchmarking project, we also extended an invitation to the University of Massachusetts AdFab facility, which is just over about an hour away in Amherst, Massachusetts. In addition, we've been working closely with our NERDIC partners, CCAT and UMaine, to produce the samples that we'll be discussing shortly. Next. So I get asked a few times why benchmarking? What's important about benchmarking? This is a 3D printing discussion. Why would you need to have a benchmark? Well, benchmarking is for anybody that's in manufacturing, it's an essential process to understand the performance of a particular system, whether it's an economic system or a production system, machining, injection molding, roll-to-roll process. You can't get very far unless you've actually developed a methodology, and that methodology stands up to iterative examination. And especially today, where we sit in front of computers, we sit in front of cell phones, we sit in front of machines that collect data that are capable of processing more data than any of us can possibly handle in a lifetime, it seems. Being able to gauge those systems, understand how those systems work, and how the data collected from them can be used to improve their performance is a key component of Industry 4.0. And so we decided that taking a look at benchmarking the equipment that we just purchased is a core feature, because the last time somebody benchmarked additive manufacturing through one of the national organizations was back in 2014, at least in the particular area that we're looking at. So we decided that this was a good first effort. Next. So again, looking at a benchmark, when we start looking at explaining processes, we have to kind of look back and understand how they've been done before. How is benchmarking of a part or a process for manufacturing being done today? Often it's done with just a pair of calipers and a spreadsheet. This actually is formed the basis of most of our lean systems, being able to understand how to define a part, how it should be manufactured, measure it, analyze that part, understand whether or not it meets a specification, the production process meets a specification, can it be improved upon, can it be further controlled, and then redefined to set a higher standard. That's benchmarking, and that's the first way it's done today. Next. We've also seen the advancement of a whole range of technologies, from large CMM systems to handheld portable systems like handheld scanners, roamer arms, firearms, to some of the technologies they have down at CCAT, like the Atos scan box. These are automated metrology systems, ways for measuring and collecting data. And they're becoming more and more, or have become more and more, a key component of the commercial manufacturing ecosphere. Next slide. But we're seeing a new trend occur in advanced manufacturing, and that's on-machine measurement and inspection. And so because of the Internet of Things, because of our ability to create cheap sensors or complex sensors, things that can do things because of laser light scanning or measurement on contact measurement and temperature probing, we can start to collect massive amounts of data from the things that we're manufacturing. And we have to find new ways to display that. So we've seen the rise of companies like Machine Metrics here in Massachusetts, who are developing digital dashboards, ways for manufacturers to install methods or systems for the people on the shop floor to actually start to gauge how their equipment's behaving, how their production cycles are scaling, and nimbly react to those data. This is becoming a center point of what 4.0 technologies offer in the future, the ability for us to now start to mount and incorporate Internet of Things types of devices, edge detection devices within our equipment, and not only in manufacturing, but in things like facilities operations, delivery, and so forth. So that's a key component in benchmarking. Next. And so what we did is we looked at, to start our quest to understand how to benchmark the desktop metal system, we looked at what was done in the past through the National Institute of Standards and Technology and ASTM under F42. We looked at the technical standard that they started using for measuring the performance of laser powder bed fusion systems. And this was built upon some of the information that was obtained through machine metrology and benchmarking subtractive machining, use of simple patterns, of repeatable patterns, understanding what could be produced on laser powder bed systems, things like circle, square, diamond-shaped shapes, stepping, graded steps, pinholes or pins, how to understand how these types of features could be manufactured using these systems was a key feature or a key question back in 2014. We wanted to ask the same questions around the desktop metal machine because it was recently iterated. It's only been around for about 2 to 3 years now. So this was the starting point for our examination. Next. And we also wanted to understand how we would share that information. So while NIST data is being constantly collected and integrated into databases like the Senbal database, we'd like to understand what those challenges are for benchmarking these new FDM or bound metal type processes, metal injection mold, powder binder jet fusion type processes. Will those also be incorporated within Senbal databases? So we had to understand how the data set might actually be of value and what its size might be. Next. So we started again back in the learning area. How are hobbyists learning to benchmark? It's interesting. Most people that have played around in the 3D printing space have printed at one time or another something like this called a benchy. There are other types of benchmarks, torture tests as they're called, that can demonstrate things like dimensional accuracy, the ability to bridge or create overhangs, find feature controls. These are all things that people are doing constantly with their 3D printers, and in the process learning how to actually operate them. If you look at the scientific community, they're actually starting to print very, very tiny benchmarks like this 20 micron size benchmark or benchy that was printed, I believe, at one of the national labs. The interesting thing about this is these benchmarks are seeing enormous distribution, over 2 million downloads since 2015. That's significant because if you think about it, the people that own hobby level 3D printing systems are becoming kind of a standards group. They're becoming a manufacturing capability unto themselves. The challenges obviously with that though, however, come into things like Creative Commons, and the benchy site itself is not secure. I found that kind of humorous because when we're looking at national defense machining standards, those things have to be addressed, and unsecured benchmark or information sites, Creative Commons, that's something that's not within the realm of defense machining. Next. So again, what can we learn from the hobbyists? Obviously, we can print very large structures. We might even be able to get them to float. And in some instances, like University of Maine has demonstrated, they can be done at very, very high quality. So these are two extremes, obviously. We want to fall somewhere a little bit towards the right side of that equation. Understand that defense machining is not just something that you're going to float down the river in, but hopefully we can help manufacturers iterate towards the right side of that equation. Next. So again, back to the desktop metal system, we wanted to understand what its capabilities were, what its material operating requirements were, the software, what kind of case studies there were, and how these benchmarks might apply. We're also, because we're developing reground materials, we're looking at expeditionary applications. Could this system be deployed in remote locations, whether it's in a field deployed location where we might be repairing military equipment, or potentially higher range applications, things like NASA, where we're looking at eventually being able to establish permanent presences on the moon and Mars. What is the definition of an office, as Desktop Metal suggests, and how can we gauge what those capabilities are? That was important in our examination. Next. So we purchased a used machine, which is something that's a common thing that most manufacturers have experience with. There's a lot of equipment out there that's constantly being resold. As a matter of fact, during this study, a company that had some very, very high potential called Digital Alloys out of Burlington, Mass, ended up shuttering its doors after about 4 years, and their equipment went up for sale on a well-known auction site. So purchasing used equipment is nothing new to manufacturers, especially manufacturers in defense supply. So that's what we started off with. We purchased a used Desktop Metal machine under a Massachusetts Capital Skills Grant to start teaching and learning about its capabilities. We wanted to understand, first off, how to prepare a facility. What were the requirements? You can see behind me, we've got a very large facility here. You know, where would a system like this fit in it? That's a kind of a benchmark. What would the ventilation, electrical floor requirements, process gas and feedstock handling requirements? These are all things that small manufacturers, mid-sized manufacturers may need to ask, certainly need to ask, especially as they're adopting a new technology. Comparatively, how can it integrate into their current operations? That's a form of a benchmark. Permits and certifications. We realize that the desktop metal system doesn't really require any. By comparison, things like laser powder bed fusion systems require much more. And so there was an immediate advantage in looking at bound metal deposition systems by comparison with things like powder bed fusion and binder jetting, in that we did not have to handle some of the potentially reactive materials, powdered metals, that I've had some experience with in the material development arena. And we also didn't have to really worry too much about enormous equipment being moved into a facility and having to have all the support technologies around it. We also looked at the training component. 3D printing, when you start looking at the hobby level, you're learning on systems like MakerBots or low-cost Amazon-level technology, as well as some things that are being sold by companies like Stratasys or other independent manufacturers at scale. The FDM process is well understood. So it's not that difficult for us to be able to get somebody trained on a low-end FDM type system and then scale them rapidly into bound metal deposition. So that is, again, another benchmark. How do we train around that? What are the current methodologies that seem to work best, and how can we intersect them to help our members and the local community access and test out metal 3D printing with the intent of eventually scaling into that space? Next. And what were some of the applications we were looking at? Again, we're a member-driven organization, so some of the companies that are affiliated with us do things like injection molding and thermoforming or overmolding of wire harness cable connectors and things like that. We wanted to understand whether or not this technology could be used to improve upon that process. Conformally cooled injection molds, for example, or heat exchangers, chiller designs for mold cooling. We've got just over in New York a very large group of companies that are in the LED lighting industry, and that seems to be, you know, an industry that's here to stay because of efficiency and its potential impacts or its proven impacts on climate change. And so looking at applications in things like 3D printed coppers for improved heat thermal performance elements, as well as things like medical devices. We've got a company here that expressed some interest in understanding the potential tooling applications in personalized medicine. So if you see this this picture down here of a scapula, that's the shoulder blade, that particular device mounted on that shoulder blade is a cutting tool that would be used in a shoulder replacement surgery. That was actually printed on our desktop metal machine to start a conversation in and around whether or not some of the materials and some of this technology could intersect local medical supply and personalized medicine and health. We also looked at applications, again, in things like lightweighting of vehicles with things like bicycle derailleur hangers, potential car parts, especially in older vehicles, and then also in agricultural supply, again, where all these types of technologies seem to overlap, whether it's fluid dynamics or thermal improvements. And then we also wanted to understand applications in legacy equipment sustainment. So again, anytime you start looking at manufacturers that are trying to get the last mile out of a piece of equipment, benchmarking it against the potential new purchase, oftentimes the decision is to keep the old equipment up and running. Well, could this particular type of system find some use in that arena? And what kind of materials would we be able to use to support and maintain equipment? Next. So that brings us to the material development side of things. Again, my startup is predominantly focused on materials development. Gene's background is heavily focused on materials development and use and industrialization, and looking at questions on where this type of material could fit into other businesses is an area that, as Mark touched upon with his background in using 3D printing and industrialization, a crucial question. So the BMD system utilizes a stick form of extruded metal, kind of almost like a pencil lead type of a stick that gets placed within the system and then is extruded in sequence in order to make parts. Well, that kind of technology is very, very well understood. If we make pencil leads or any kind of compressed extruded metal, very low cost equipment can manufacture that. We wanted to understand whether there was an intersect opportunity for some of the work we're doing in reground metals to potentially use the desktop metal system as a material development platform. And again, what would be the challenges in something like this? What kind of opportunities could bound metal deposition pose for things like quality control? But could it also be used as a stepping stone, perhaps, into things like single pass binder jetting, desktop metals larger systems, or even in binder jetting in general with companies like X1? So again, could we use and measure the performance of some of these materials as a development platform using the system? Next. And so this builds upon, as I mentioned, work that we've been doing here before. BSS and CCAT back in 2017 discovered that we could indeed recycle stainless steel scraps from turning operations, very simple materials, scrap metals, from things like 3-axis CNCs, Swiss milling centers, all sorts of different applications directly into usable powders. And this was built upon some research that we discovered that was being done overseas in Turkey, where researchers did not have access to gas atomization or plasma atomization to make these highly spherical powders that Jean showed us in her slide. We were looking at ways to just convert this stuff directly into powder using mechanical grinding systems. Next. And that indeed ended up with some success. We used directed energy deposition and lens, two processes that CCAT has to not only print some samples, but also print millable parts using some reference designs that they've been exploring. And that was quite impressive. And certainly was something well worthwhile from the standpoint of short funding science, ways to get things done quickly, demonstrate what's possible, and then start looking at what you need to fill in the blanks. Next. And so back to those images, our material is on the left. We were able to create again a low cost, mechanically milled, rounded grain, a spheroidal material that has some qualities that make it suitable for things like directed energy deposition, potentially FDM or bound metal powder, binder jetting, and also potentially in cold spray. So we're looking at this potential value for this set of materials in cold spray. By comparison, materials that are normally produced in the metal injection molding industry, water atomized powders, or in pressed metal sintering and molding, or gas atomized powders used predominantly in 3D printing, you can see that there's quite a difference. But what we found is that the materials that we have a place in this landscape. And so again, the next step for us was, now we can make them, we can make potentially a lot of it. How does it actually fit within the manufacturing sphere? Next. So next step along this, intermediary step, was an introduction to the Army Research Lab, and where they were doing some very high-end work in producing something called nanogalvanic aluminum, a powder that can actually react with water or saline-type fluids to produce high hydrogen generation and generate electricity through things like permeable membrane fuel cells. We looked at their technology as an inline production capability for recycling things like scrap metals in the field. And again, this technology is fairly well understood. We understand that the cost structure around it, and it opens the doors, not just to remanufacturing scrap metals, but also potentially becoming toll processors for other materials that are streaming out of our universities, which again, in the instance of the Berkshire Innovation Center, the Connecticut Center for Advanced Technology, Vermont Technical College, UMaine, and all the other participants within the NERDIC framework, there's a lot of really interesting work being done in material science. How do you get your first sample? Well, we demonstrated that we can do that very simply, but how do you get to production quantities? What are the benchmarks in cost assessment and the economics of those systems? These are the things that manufacturers need to know, and that oftentimes researchers may not have the ability to calculate. So we were looking at that kind of background and research from participants at our national labs. We also looked at scaling supply. How do we go from that point to a scaled production capability? And again, a recent background is that Desktop Metal has acquired X1, a binder jetting company. And the integration of those technologies and the overlaps are significant, because in the situation of the BIC, we have some Desktop Metal technology. Connecticut Center for Advanced Technologies has some X1 technology, and we hope at some point in the future to be able to start benchmarking that also. Next. And then again, back to some more whys. Lots of reasons why to be doing the things that we're doing. Cold spray expeditionary repair applications. If we're talking about defense supply, there's nothing more important than being able to support those people in the field whose lives are at stake. And so if we're looking at manufacturing something here in the States that's going to be supported overseas, we need to know how to repair it. And so some of the work that's being done by the groups in and around Worcester Polytechnic, Cold Spray Action Team, Solvus Global, and the companies that supply into them, things like Centerline and VRC, and now SPE3D. These companies are manufacturing technologies that can be deployed in the field, and that can help sustain the products that the warfighters actually use. This becomes a core question and a core benchmark, again, that we're looking at examining in the future. Next. And again, why? Because our manufacturers need to understand why. The BIC is host to a number of manufacturers, again, including General Dynamics, Synecon Plastic, Lenco Armored Vehicles, a wide variety of manufacturers that need to understand what these technologies can do to make sure that their systems have the longest possible life in the field. Next. And to also explore those applications and what could potentially become threats, things that we might not recognize. I was recently at a CAM event in Lowell, at UMass Lowell, and I asked one of the presenters, who's from the U.S. Army, what they need in terms of additive manufacturing. And the first thing they said was, we need ways to manufacture munitions in the field. That is a core need. And they need also to be able to do that so that they don't have to leave them there. Thinking about what's going on in Afghanistan currently, we've left a lot of ordnance in the field. It would be a lot better if we could just manufacture the things as we need them, which again is another feature of additive manufacturing. Next. And again, what's possible, to understand what's potential, what could be a threat. Benchmarks help us assess that. Next. And ultimately, it can also help us develop new systems that expand the capabilities of our warfighter and help us make sure that they come home safe. Next. So benchmarks are a starting line. And the starting line for us was the NIST benchmark. Next. We used bound metal design guides from Desktop Metal to understand what was possible with the machine and what would be of value in terms of data. Next. We printed a series of test samples from the NIST, the first NIST paper, and we started to assess them for performance of the particular printers. Here you see on the left a Mark Forge Mark II 3D printer. In the center, a Stratasys, a Dimension legacy printer, and then something new, a large format Big Rep 3D printer, which you can see just behind me. We wanted to understand what the materials and capabilities of those systems might be. Next. We then used some help from a partner down in Rhode Island, Hexagon Metrology. They are the manufacturers of large scale and small scale automated and legacy coordinate measuring machines, CMMs. They also use structured light scanners to be able to help reverse engineer and inspect parts. We got some initial data to understand what was possible from these first NIST benchmarks. Next. We then realized that in the process of trying to 3D print something, that there were some size limits with the Desktop Metal machine. The Desktop metal system uses a furnace system that has setter plates. So these ceramic plate behind the NIST artifact here, that setter plate is something that needs to have the print entirely placed within the center of it. It can't have any overlaps on the edges, otherwise the print will fail. And so we didn't want to have that happen, so our first attempt was to print a smaller NIST artifact to understand resolution, how well the print actually functioned, whether it was capable of generating any useful data. And what we realized in the process is that a smaller sample just generates a smaller sample of data. It may not actually be useful. Next. So we decided next to redesign the technology, and we took the approach that most 3D printers or small manufacturers might use. We used the lowest possible costing tech. We went to a MakerBot. We revised the sample. We took out some of the duplicative data. We don't need redundancies. We just need to understand what's possible. And then we added some structures. We added these overhangs, because overhangs are a common feature in additive manufacturing. We wanted to understand whether or not we'd be able to duplicate that kind of structure within the bound metal system. We also added through holes, because one of the areas that we're looking for is whether or not those through holes will be something that pose a barrier, an obstacle in things like fluid control or coolant. Next. And then we printed many of them. We went out and we not only printed on a MakerBot, we printed on a Stratasys machine, we printed on a desktop metal machine, and also a Markforged machine. And then we analyzed those parts. What was the end result? Next. And what we saw immediately were some limitations, some challenges with our desktop system. The extruded metal sometimes printed well, sometimes it didn't. In these overhang features, we had some collapsing. In our through channels, we had some areas where the sintered metal eventually wasn't able to be removed. And then we also had some challenges with inset features in things like circles and squares. But these were all things that were covered in the bound metal deposition guidelines that desktop metal provided. Next. So then we went out next and compared not only the capabilities that we now have, but also the capabilities of online providers, companies that produce parts for manufacturers throughout the world, companies like Shapeways, Material-A's, Xometry, and Protolabs. We wanted to understand what their capabilities were, and we also wanted to understand price benchmarks. It's very easy to do some of this. Anybody can create these accounts, but we weren't really sure where the capabilities that we have, as well as our partners had, fit within that equation. Now we will be producing some more of this data in the report that we will be submitting in September, and would invite participants to connect back with CCAT and the NERDIC community to understand some of this benchmark. It certainly has provided to be useful for us. Next. We then went to the University of Massachusetts, likewise contracted a series of parts, predominantly from their EOS M290 system, DMLS system that they have, as well as a EOS P110 system, which sinters polyamide materials. And then we also used their 3 of their Markforged systems to produce coupons. Next. We also explored heat treatment options. One of the key components in metal additive manufacturing is stress relief. We understand, we can 3D print something, but sometimes those parts aren't, while fully dense, aren't something that you'd want to put into a machine or into an end use, because the grain structure of those metals may be brittle. There may be some warping or some torsion or some implied stresses from the process of manufacturing. Machining things does this. Just carving up a piece of metal on a machine center can create heat stresses in areas where a block of metal does not behave the same way as its cast form or its refined form. So in 3D printing parts with the DMLS, the laser sintering systems at UMass and at CCAT, we requested a heat treatment system or process. Very simple, wrap it in tinfoil, throw in a small carbon source. In this situation, we use newspaper, and fire it at 1,000 degrees for about 15 minutes. Very simple process. Many companies work with this, especially if they're in the tooling industry. So that's the process we followed. Next. With regard to the desktop metal machine, we had University of Maine print on their desktop metal 1 system. We have a metal 2 system. The differences in the desktop metal 1 to 2 system is that it requires a debinding phase, a phase where you have to take this part after it's been printed, put it into a solvent debind system for a couple days, and then you put it into a sintering furnace. And what we encountered here with our system is you don't have to do that debind phase. As a result, we both encountered some slump, some areas where the part did not uphold overhangs. And we also encountered some print errors, situations where the 3D printer, because it's a fused filament deposition type system, didn't extrude the pink interlayer, which you can kind of see in between these parts here. These are challenges with any type of mechanical system, 3D printers even more so, because these types of parts often take up to a day or more to print. And any error that's introduced into that process can be a failure point. Next. And then we went to Connecticut Center for Advanced Technology and had them duplicate the same work that we'd requested elsewhere. So the total sample set that we used is here. It's predominantly MakerBot method or Markforged Onyx type prints, and then a select series of metal parts that are either desktop metal or DMLS type systems or parts. We then use structured light scanning to scan those parts using CCAT's ATIS scanner. Next. And generated a truly phenomenal data set, close to 1,200 pages total. Of that data, it can get very coarse or granular. We can get into actual surface dimensions on all the features of the NIST sample. We will be going further down this path to understand just what the value of that data can actually be. But the heat maps are the most important. Looking at comparisons of BIC metrology from things like MakerBots through the desktop metal studio system, you can see lots of variation, but you can also see that these are certainly useful pieces of data, useful end results that can, when combined with 3D machining, potentially produce some really useful end results. Next. Same thing with UMass AdFab and with CCAT. So here is our kind of lead-in hypothesis. It's very rough data, but we were looking really to be able to help manufacturers understand something. What's it going to cost us to 3D print some parts, whether it's in a polymer or composite or metals? And how accurate, how repeatable, what kind of performance of those materials could actually be implied from a study like this? And ultimately, are these parts going to be usable? We kept encountering a term, not plastic, when talking to metal machining companies and manufacturers. What we think is that obviously high on the end use is DMLS, any type of laser assembly type machining. That's where there's a high usability, but there's also a high price. Most of the DMLS parts were 2 to 3 times what was possible with the desktop metal bound metal system. On the lower end, polymer parts, composite parts, they're fairly easy to produce, they're fairly low cost, and they do meet the needs of many machiners, manufacturers in terms of fixturing and forming or end use for things that might break often, but that don't have any structural or high stress failure potential. So that was our basic result. Next. And where can it be applied? Everybody in the 3D printing industry understands that there was a huge gain in utilized additive manufacturing of metal to produce and consolidate parts into a durable LEAP fuel nozzle. When we look at advancing aerospace and defense systems, things like SpaceX's super heavy rocket, the complexity is enormous. It's off the scale. Can these types of technologies, these types of materials that we're examining with our manufacturing partners through NERDIC start to pave paths for companies to access the supply chain? Next. And there's a reason. Back in about a week and a half ago, Elon Musk released these two pictures in a tweet. And he pointed to the 1930s, where the heyday of our economic growth in many ways was heralded by manufacturing and construction of large-scale steel buildings. Well, if you look at August 2021, that's an enormous steel structure. And that's right, it's steel. Back in 2019, when asked what they were going to manufacture the Starship out of, they said, we're going to make it out of 301 steel. I think they may have moved on to 316 and some other alloys, but currently they're planning to manufacture 1,000 or more of these systems in coming decades using steel. How large will that workforce be? Next. Because it took over 400,000 people to land us on the moon 6 times. So if we understand the scope and scale of potential Mars and lunar colonization efforts, the figure there could easily be 10 times that number, if not more. So it's important, if we're looking again at benchmarks, this is more of an economics benchmark, a planning benchmark for policymakers, for people that are looking at trying to figure out how to plan. Well, we could see an enormous growth in 4.0 technology integration within manufacturing, just in support of the commercial space industry. That's something that certainly makes me think a lot. Next. And so how can the NERDIC community within that benefit? How can we help defense manufacturers make informed choices? That's, again, part of the benchmarking process. So, in short, we've learned quite a bit, and I would like to kind of get ready to end this, I guess, conversation in terms of our presentation. But these are the things that we learned in the process from just a simple benchmark. And by no means is the work done. We'd encourage you to perhaps participate in the next phase. Next. By helping us pare down some of this data, understand what it actually can be used for in regional manufacturing. Maybe explore some applications with the group to understand whether or not what we've learned or what we've begun learning can be used to calibrate and improve performance results for some of these newer systems. And how do we obtain more data? Certainly we can send you this file and encourage you to print this if you have a MakerBot, or if you have a Markforged machine, or if you're fortunate enough to have some of the technologies that we have. If not, and you'd like to get experience learning how to 3D print some of these parts in metal, please contact the various NERDIC centers and help us for the study, because we've only got 12 pieces of data currently. I can imagine what maybe another few dozen could actually help us understand. Next. Thank you.
So thank you, Steve, for that great presentation. If you do have any questions, please do take the time to type them out in the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel on the right. You can also use the chat area if you wish to put your question in there as well.
This is Jackie. I'm just going to chime in here because I have my own question while we're waiting for some to come in.
Sure.
So, Steve, this is a really amazing presentation. So thank you very much to all of the collective team that had worked to put this together. I know that this is just the beginning, right? But it's really, really well done. The question that I have is regarding the scanner data. And so I'm wondering, maybe this is Nasir pointed to you, is there any filtering that's placed onto that? Because in many of those sample scans, right, you could see the variation in the heat map towards the center versus the side. So is that real true you know, is that really the presentation of how the additive built is? Maybe it's concave. I don't recall the colors of the heat map, but is it more concave towards the center? And if, Steve, you have any comments on that, just, you know, high level, looking at pretty colored images, right? That's what people like to see, but what's really going on there?
Sure, Steve, you want to take it first and I'll take it after?
Sure. So like, you know, obviously in a polymer part, one of the things that happens is as a printer's cooling or the part is cooling, you're going to get some degree of shrink and warpage. We saw the same thing happen in the metal parts, and we know that if you look at the heat maps of the heat treated parts, it's slightly less, I believe. We also understand that within the desktop metal part, the challenge with it is there's internal latticing that also may contribute to some of that concavity. These are some of those things that, you know, we just encountered, and we wouldn't have encountered it unless we had done the study. So towards that, yeah, I think that that's really useful data, because if I'm going to print a part, whether it's like a mold form or a fixture, I'm going to want to understand how to machine that afterwards. I'm going to want to understand what the edge requirements might be. Do I need to build them a little bit more dense? Do I need to modify the process so that it's going to be able to hold on to something more? These are important things that we learned. Nasir?
From a scanning perspective, you know, we use structured light, so we're grabbing all the surface texture from the print. So you know, if you actually zoomed in on the data, you see the individual kind of the ridges, if you will, from the 3D prints. So in regards to the question about filtering of the data, what we're seeing in the heat map is we're comparing against the nominal, the CAD file. And what the system does is it shoots out normals from the CAD surface until it hits the scan data. And then it colorizes that deviation, you know, given the color, the color mapping that you specify. And to some degree, you can specify how, you know, within what's out of tolerance, what is the maximum length of that ray that's going to shoot out before you say, okay, we're not even going to look at that data, it's too far out. So that's inherently built in. But all the regions that are colored, there is a color averaging that is applied. So if we could control that color averaging to say that don't do any color averaging, and then you'd see all the individual ridges. So you'd see areas of the, you know, you'd actually kind of see as the filament was laid down. So the color averaging helps to kind of visualize almost like a running average, if you will, of the data. So you get an overall view of the distortion. Otherwise, you'd see a very speckled plot, and it would be difficult to kind of figure out what's going on from that. So that is applied in the color plot.
Nasir, could that be used for feedback on a machine?
In a couple different ways. In what way do you mean?
To correct perhaps performance of the machine?
Okay, so if we're talking about overall distortion, you know, and we are looking at kind of the overall that running average, if you will, you can use that deviation plot to create an edited nominal model. So in other words, if I made a square of 1 inch tall and my print came out 900 thousandths, right? So it was just short of the 1 inch and it came out to 0.9 inches. That color plot tells me what that deviation is. That deviation is going to be 100 thousandths. And what we could do is use that deviation to apply a negative offset to the CAD model. So now we can adjust that CAD height to be 1.1 inches, so that when it does print, it comes down closer to the 1 inch, to the nominal value. I use that as a very you know, simple example, but when you apply that to the 3D space with curved feet, you know, with intricate features, that color plot really comes in handy, because now you're not just applying an offset of the surface, what we saw in the top surface of the parts that were printed, we had that concave curvature. So now we can apply a negative concave curvature to the CAD surface so that it comes out flat rather than just a simple offset. So definitely we can apply those, that deviation information as a sort of calibration to the distortions that are created during the manufacturing process. A couple of questions that just came in here. Chris, did you want to go ahead and ask any questions that you may have?
No, I came on to ask a question in case there weren't any others,
Sure.
but I'll let the audience ask their questions, and then if we have time, I have a question I could ask.
Sure. So this first question that I see here is timing and contact info to be a part of the next or current benchmarking process.
I guess that would be, contact CCAT through the, I would assume either the handout or the following survey that you'll receive after the webinar, and then just kind of CC Nasir and myself.
Yeah, you'll see actually on the right side of the GoToWebinar control panel, there's a section called handouts, and there's actually a link in there. If you click on that, you can download this presentation, and you'll have the contact information in there. The next question that we have is, when buying the used machine, do you go through a broker? What resource certified seller do you use for your purchase?
So we went through Select Additive, which is a Connecticut company. They're affiliated with the Morse Group, Morse Technologies. That was a good question. We looked around. We couldn't find anybody that was selling used equipment, but eventually connected back with them through prior purchases, and they were able to secure one. I believe it was in Michigan. So they're out there. I've seen a number of auctions, even international, where these systems are now becoming available. So, yeah.
So again, I'd encourage any additional questions. At this time, I read out all the questions that we have. So, Chris.
Yeah, I was curious about the test artifact that came from NIST, and obviously you wanted to make some additions and changes to that to demonstrate and to qualify and benchmark, features that can be added through this additive manufacturing approach. Is there any involvement in NIST to sort of standardize around some new test sample that could be produced? And then my other question is around just a lot of people that I'm talking to are concerned about the material properties of parts coming off the 3D, and thinking about NIST certification or qualifying these parts to certain standards. And you talked about the heat treating process and some of the internal stresses and things. If you can speak just a little bit toward standardization, certification, processes or whatever that can help to replicate parts coming off a metal additive process, to traditional manufacturing methods.
Sure. So one of the things that was interesting to us, looking at something like a polymer part, is inside there's an internal lattice. These aren't fully dense. But if we look at a DMLS system, this is a fully dense part. It's a powder bed part. There's no internal geometry to this other than the holes that we put in it. In the desktop metal parts, these have a gyroidal internal lattice. And so when we start looking at emerging potentially a new standard with some help from NIST and certainly the F42 group at ASTM, it's going to be important for us not just to look at things like bound metal overhang features that might slump or through hole features, but the software that goes into generating the internal lattice, because it's highly probable that in some ways the distortions that we're seeing have to do with trapped air, that have to do with potentially debound gases. I mean, these are porous to a very, very low degree. But if I was to stick this in a salt tank to do a corrosion study on it, we don't know what's happening on the inside until we cut it open. And so these are some of those things that I guess would have to be explored further, because the NIST attempt was purely to understand surface feature, geometric potential in something that's not machinable. So you can't really easily machine any of these features. It's something useful for an introductory level additive manufacturing training and discussion. There have been numerous modifications to this. So we now have example after example, paper after paper, where researchers have added features and channels and loops and even witness samples, things that you can pop off to do metallurgy and metrology studies on the end part, both before and after heat treat. We have yet to even start that process with something like BMD, which I'm certain that companies like Desktop Metal or Markforged or BASF and others have, but that probably is proprietary and needs to have a third-party validation. So it could be something that we stand up under another NIST or ASTM level project, possibly through America Makes. Certainly if the MEPs on a national level, starting off perhaps just regionally, would back that. I think that we could certainly provide some level of funding incentive for companies to come and participate. And then, yeah, I guess that's the big question is how do you get that data out to the MEPs? I think it has to be a participatory type of a thing where you actually, or we as a group, engage and say, come learn what this center can do, get your experience at it, and then, help us emerge those standards. Is it a benchmarking study, twice a year to make sure everybody's machines are operating properly, or is it a benchmarking study monthly? And who performs that? It could possibly be something that MEPs help to contribute with.
Another question that came in, are you using multiple metals or just one metal on the machine, on the desktop machine? We're curious about the oxidation process and clearing things out.
So we're currently working with 2 alloys, 316L, the version 2, which only requires, it skips the debind process. UMaine has the version 1, which does not skip the debind. They have to do the debind, but they're also exploring version 2. So we hope to have a couple of machines capable of version 2. We have 17.4 pH samples here, so we can print in 17.4 phase hardened steel, which is useful in medical tooling. As well as some other applications. We know of some defense applications. We're working again with General Dynamics to explore some potential applications in areas where that material might find value. And we've recently been looking at the upgrade to titanium. Desktop Metal now can print, I believe, a total of 6 materials. They have an H13 tool steel, 4140 I think is in process. They have copper, 100% pure copper, and they recently released titanium standards. We'd like to start exploring with that. It's again a process. If we could print some titanium samples, then the challenge for benchmarking is finding a manufacturer that has powder bed process and the facilities SOPs to be able to handle reactive alloys like titanium. So that now becomes the next question. And from what I understand, BTC is looking at this as far as a potential standard up in Vermont. And I know that CCAT has the capability of printing reactives. So I think it's something that we can start looking at maybe within a year or two.
Yeah, you're correct. At the Vermont Manufacturing Collaborative at BTC, we've purchased the EOS machine, which is going in this week, being installed and powered and all of that. So we're real excited to have that capability. We'd be happy to work with you guys for benchmarking.
Great.
So thanks for all the questions. If you do have any more, please do feel free to reach out to us. I can forward all the questions over to Steve, and we can help answer any other questions that you may have. So at this time, I'd like to go ahead and get on to the ending slides of this presentation. Thank you again, Steve, for that wonderful presentation. Really appreciated all the information that you shared with us.
Thank you, sir.
So we have opportunities for defense supplier companies to participate in technology demonstrations. If your company has had at least 5% of your sales in one of the last 5 years that ultimately benefited the Department of Defense, we do welcome you to apply for these no-cost demonstration projects at ccat.us/NERDIC/apply. These demonstrations are intended to be presented, so preferably we're looking for non-ITAR or export control projects. Otherwise, we will work with you to identify components of the projects that can be recorded and presented. We do currently have additional opportunities for free 60-day trial of artificial intelligence using Stanley X's Deep Power training and upskilling tool. If you are interested, please do apply by August 20th. We are scheduled to launch the 60-day trial by mid-September. We have a technology demonstration coming up at the end of this month on August 31st, 12 to 1:30. Powder bed fusion and bound metal deposition additive manufacturing processes will be presented by our technology partners at the University of Maine Center for Additive Manufacturing of Metals and Vermont Technical College. The presentations on these technology demonstrations are meant to illustrate, real-world applications of these technologies. What challenges in manufacturing these technologies help to address, how the technology was applied between the different pilot projects, and what the outcomes were. We welcome you to register to attend these presentations at ccat.us/NERDIC. We did want to make you aware of this great opportunity for manufacturing companies. The U.S. Air Force desires to expand the U.S. supply chain capacity to manufacture small turbine engine parts. And these are engines that produce less than about 2,000 pound force of thrust. The goal is to reduce costs and delivery schedules for existing suppliers and stand up additional suppliers, including from non-aerospace industry sectors. We welcome you to visit sep.ccat.us for more information and to apply for consideration for this program. With that, we'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us today. We do hope the presentation and the great questions that were asked help to understand the benefits of additive technologies. If you do have any further questions, again, please feel free to contact us and we will be sure to get your questions answered. Thank you again and have a great rest of your day.